This is Yesterzine, the monthly magazine show about monthly magazines. We take a magazine from the Golden Age, play the games they liked most and least, and then flip through to find out what gaming was like when you could buy an officially endorsed magazine covering your machine of choice. Okay, that one is more recent than normal for our intro, but it's also timely. Earlier this year, Future published the last issue of official PlayStation Magazine UK, a title that was at one point bought by several 100,000 people a month, but now ends a run of official console magazines dating right back to the Golden Age. The UK outlets went a bit lazy and copied the US sites, and their claim it ended a run of 32 years of official titles dating back to the launch of the in-house Nintendo magazine Nintendo Power in 1988. In fact, the UK trumps them on this. The first single manufacturer official magazine I know of is 1984's CPC 464 user, the official Amstrad magazine. Acquiring its much better known name of Amstrad Computer User a year later, it ran until 1992, more than long enough to cross over and give the UK an unbroken 36-year run of official titles, running right through Sega, Nintendo, PlayStation and Microsoft focused titles until today. In that same year of 1992, the unofficial all consoles magazine Mean Machine split into two titles: Mean Machine Sega, which we've seen before on this channel, and the obvious frenemy, the officially endorsed Nintendo Magazine System. Official magazines have always been a slightly tricky thing. There's better access to information, of course. The likes of Nintendo and Sony would always give you the carefully filtered gossip first. You'll get the interviews with Shiggy or Mark Cerny more easily. But you've also got to be careful. Print too many rumours, true or not, and you might risk annoying the very people that endorse you. There's also a possible license fee for using the names and insignias. And then there's the issue of trust. Even now, in the wake of the closing of the last official magazine, people have said to me they've never trusted their reviews, that they believed an official magazine would be inclined to give games an easy ride. And even I can see that maybe for the big first-party titles this could be true. Our gaming heaven in the issue we're going to look at is one that Nintendo had a lot riding on, and it duly gets a stonking review. Equally though, back when we saw Total, an unofficial magazine, they gave Mario is Missing an equally and undeserved high mark. The issue we're about to take a look at takes its sequel and gives it something of a kicking, so maybe it's not always true. A few months ago we looked at an early issue of official PlayStation, and the gaming hell was a Sony published title. So maybe it doesn't always work like that for the independently published official magazines, even if it perhaps could be for Nintendo Power, which was explicitly produced by Nintendo rather than just with their blessing. If it puts some people off though, it seems they were a minority. In almost all cases, the official magazines have tended to be the last survivors. Official PS1 ran until 2004, 3 years after the machine's replacement. Official Xbox lasted until last year, a couple of years after the last indie. And even Sega had an official presence just slightly longer than DC UK survived. It's only now that changes, because the death of official PlayStation magazine is only the death of the official bit, and technically the station magazine bit. The magazine is continuing with the same staff and a near identical design under the name Play, marking the first UK independent console magazine since, well, Play, which lasted until mid-2018, spending its last 2.5 years as a digital-only title. So for the first time since official magazines existed, the last mag standing is an independent, and we genuinely wish them the best of luck. We've always quite liked OPM and its consistent staff for a number of years now, a massive rarity in magazines. It means they've involved a consistent and attractive style both in writing and design. It's funny though, it seems likely, just because Sony, Microsoft and Nintendo have all let their official magazines slip, and that print isn't exactly having a mass market renaissance anytime soon, that official PlayStation UK will turn out to mark the very last official magazine in the UK. And in a way, its transition into a related independent magazine is a very neat callback. That's exactly what happened to Amstrad Computer User too, as when it died in mid-1992, it became independent, as games magazine CPC Attack for the last 9 months of its life. the only other time I know that to have happened. Let's hope play lasts a little longer. And so this month, to mark the passing of official console magazines, we celebrate their era with the original at the height of its popularity, Nintendo Magazine System. Our lineup from issue 19 visits 2 current Nintendo systems at the time, with a third also getting games, and the magazine looks forward to a 4th. Our Gaming Heaven is one of Nintendo's most remembered on the Game Boy. Our Gaming Hell is the distinct NES version of a game I don't like on the Master System, so that bodes splendidly. First though, Nintendo take a risk. If not for getting lucky with a certain Russian puzzle game, then Super Mario Land was the defining event of the Game Boy launch, and was unsurprisingly the title that got pushed out as the bundled choice by Pachinov's finest. We've looked at the hideous state of handhelds on Yesterzine before, but when the best you've got is still largely baked in LCD stuff like the Game & Watch, Mario Land was an absolute revelation. Debuting around the time of Super Mario Bros. 3, after it in Japan, before it in the UK, it presented what was absolutely a console-quality Mario platformer in a handheld. And while slightly simpler in design than its big brother, it was arguably the second best Mario game in existence on any format when it debuted. While Tetris had been chosen as the packing game, because as Henk Rogers said,
Mario will sell the machine to young boys, Tetris will sell it to everyone.
That did not stop Mario Land selling the machine to a lot of young boys. And everyone else too. Super Mario Land would sell 18 million copies. That is 1 million more than Super Mario Bros. 3 did. The sequel came along 2 years later, with both Mario 3 and Mario World to learn from. 6 golden coins added an overworld, much more detailed console-like graphics, and a buttload more variety. And it's a gorgeous game, especially if played on something a bit modern, where its tendency to get a little bit smeary on an original DMG Game Boy screen can be combated. The game also introduced Mario's nemesis Wario for the first time, who has basically nicked Mario's private island and castle. That a plumber who keeps skipping off work to go chase his girlfriend around can afford a private island might be the most unrealistic thing in the whole of the Mario universe. Nonetheless, despite some qualms over its lack of difficulty, Mario Land 2 was another stormer, ending up at number 5 in the all-time list for the Game Boy, and is a game I was very much more fond of than the first one at the time. Which is why it's brave that for Super Mario Land 3, Nintendo took a look at their biggest character and said, nah mate. Unless you complete Super Mario Land 3, you will not even see Mario, because you're going to spend the time controlling Wario, who, having failed to pinch Mario's castle, decides to get his own, with blackjack and hookers. And he's going to fund this by travelling to yet another island and nicking all the treasure held by the Brown Sugar Pirates. It's kinda not a surprise though, despite being involved in the original arcade machine, Nintendo R&D 1 didn't create Mario. And the creation of Wario for Mario Land 2 has been widely reported as explicitly a subtle protest about being dragged off their own IP to write Mario games. So that they would strive to drop Mario entirely from the series as soon as possible is not especially surprising. The game starts with an adorable moment when Wario comes storming into the save room using his dash and grabs his hat. And in that moment, the game just introduces you to its 2 primary differences to normal Mario games. Wario's bash move is going to be your primary attack, and his hat your primary upgrade. There's a heck of a lot of detail to Wario Land. Half a decade of Game Boy development has really let them get the best out of the machine, although it does come at the cost of being able to see further ahead of and behind yourself. It's also probably why, even in a series of generally slower games than some platformers, this is a very leisurely one in terms of making progress. The enemy mechanics are very different. Unless you're Mini Wario, you can generally bash through most enemies and blocks, only having to watch for when they have spikes, which is often. This isn't perfect, since detail is not the Game Boy's friend. Playing it on a Super Game Boy like I'm doing for this does improve the situation rather, of course. That's not the only change. Coins are no longer coins in the Mario sense. The primary aim of the game is to collect as many coins and as much treasure as possible, which actually changes the end of the game, as Wario can end up getting anything from the castle of his dreams right down to a birdhouse, depending on how much loot he's got in his pockets. Coins are also your passport both to the end of the level and to the restart points, which are often pretty well hidden in the level, and both require 10 coins to pass. You can also improve your coin stash with the end-of-level minigames. I say minigame, but there's no actual skill to this, just a 1 in 2 chance of either halving or doubling your current level stash. Given this means in a fair world you'll on average come out with what you went in with, then better just to skip them and bank what you actually collected. Extra lives are now in the form of hearts, each pickup giving you 10 towards the traditional 100 equals extra Wario. The hat power-ups are dispensed from Wario blocks too, and include the ceiling hanging bullhorns and the always satisfying and health and safety defying dragon hat that really works. The level design is about the one place it sticks vaguely Mario traditional, relying heavily on underground sections, even if they're not currently in pipes, and alternative routes further up in the sky. A lot of the constructs of walls and Wario blocks will be very familiar to players of the first decade or so of 2D Mario platformers. But there's no shame in that, and provides a bridge to a series that continued on through the remaining Nintendo handhelds, ditching the Mario Land name altogether after this first game. As for this one, I was very impressed revisiting it right up until the first main boss, who is complete and total bastard face. The way you're supposed to kill him is fairly simple. Bash into him, then jump him as he flies around. And up. And down. It's a heck of a lot of attacking for a first boss to do, and his speed is something the game really hasn't shown or demanded of you before this point. These factors combined demand absurd timing, and you really have to do it 3 times without getting hit yourself, because I've not yet worked out how to damage him as Mini Wario, and neither, as far as I can tell, has the internet. It's not just me either. This appears on TV tropes as an example of that one boss, and as a wake-up call in terms of a difficulty spike. And in as long as I played it for this, I've not actually got past him. Maybe they overcompensated. Mario Land 2 had a reputation for being too easy, although I wasn't really convinced given the suboptimal controls and screen on the device compared to modern consoles and handhelds. In any case, I've seen a lot less of Wario Land than I'd like to. It's not a new problem, to be fair. If you refer to this chart of reasons people stop playing games, you'll find it's 1% getting bored, 1% getting a new game, 2% finishing the game, and 96% that stupid cheaty bullshit boss who is 50 times harder than any other part of the sodding game, and screw this, I'm going to go play Enduro Racer again. Okay, yes of course you should play this, but just be prepared that you might have to put in the effort to get any further than I have so far. It's both a seminal platformer and historically interesting as the junction between 2 series and the playable debut of one of the more memorable characters in the Mario universe. It's not like the boss problems are unique to this game after all, and what this gets out of the Game Boy is second only to the Donkey Kong Country ports. Still though, that utter cheating bastard faced boss git and his stupid flying across the screen like a complete dickhead. The gaming heaven there, on the Game Boy. There's a section cut from this episode for time you'll see as a Yesterzine extra in a couple of weeks that focuses on one of the more interesting SNES reviews in this issue. And without wishing to spoil, the gaming hell is on the good old NES. So that's 3 viable platforms from a single console manufacturer getting games at the same time. Nonetheless, things moved quickly back then, and NMS this month introduces Nintendo's next system, Project Reality, developed in conjunction with Silicon Graphics. If that name is unfamiliar, it's understandable. This is the machine that, having briefly carried the names Ultra Famicom and Ultra 64, was eventually released as simply the Nintendo 64. We're ahead of that here though, actually a lot more ahead of it than they expected. NMS promised the console in your hands by Christmas 1995, but in fact it wouldn't see a UK release until March 1997. They also promised it for £190 and it was launched for £250. So it's fair to say that even with the help of Silicon Graphics, delivering these kind of mind-blowing graphics was harder than Nintendo expected. Much harder, as it turns out. NMS had a video with Silicon Graphics president James Clark, where he certainly didn't understate the plan. And the accompanying video of demos was certainly impressive.
In the last 10 years, specialists have used Silicon Graphics computers to create incredible images, ultra-detailed models of cars, planes and even molecules, and fantastic creations on the silver screen including Terminator 2 and the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. But a partnership with Nintendo is one of the most exciting things we've ever done. because of Project Reality. For the first time, we will give millions of video games players, not just the specialists, the chance to interact right inside these magnificent virtual worlds.
Brave words, and they were up to the "oh, he's not finished."
We didn't want to make a machine that was just like a little better than everybody else's. It had to be dramatically better, visibly superior. What players will get is truly amazing. Many times the power of any computing system.
Not games there, computers. It's a big promise, and no wait, he's still going.
Throughout the history of silicon graphics, there have always been doubters who said we'd never deliver the computer power we promised at the cost we projected, but we always did. A new industry standard will be set. That standard will be available to no video game manufacturer except Nintendo.
Right, I've muted him now. So here are those demos. This is what they promised you would see in a little over a year for your cash. And here's Turok on the released N64. There's a term for screenshots and videos that do not actually accurately reflect the product delivered, and it's the charming bullshots. And this was perhaps the most egregious instance of bullshots in history, just pipping the time Sony famously promised PlayStation 2 would do Toy Story in real time. One thing that's obvious is how they were hoping to do a lot more gritty realism than was eventually the case. And that's probably for the best. Can you imagine if Nintendo had followed the entire rest of the industry into adopting the 2 browns and a green colour scheme that plagued us for most of the subsequent 2 console generations? The demo for a new Mario Land game was, for some reason, the gang standing at a bus stop. Ironic. We only have screenshots of this one from NMS, and minus the characters, it's very much grey, green and brown. It contrasts sharply with Mario 64 that is noticeably lacking some of the detail, but is a hell of a lot more attractive. And that's really the pattern. The videos are of things the N64 could broadly do, but at a lower detail, and with noticeably worse draw difference. In many ways, if I'd told you this was a look from 2000 at the forthcoming GameCube, you might possibly have believed me. So what the hell happened? The N64 was a great machine in many ways, but what it certainly wasn't was this machine. And indeed, we actually know from the testimony of people involved at the time that these demos were a combination of stuff in real time and pre-rendered, but always using SG workstations that cost tens of thousands of pounds rather than any actual prototype hardware. It's not entirely the published specifications either. The computing power we promised was largely delivered. NMS details those specs. Higher than 100 MHz clock speed. The N64 runs at 93. Those performance numbers add up to 125 MIPS or so. It does give 24-bit colour. These are certainly real-time and 3D. It does do CD quality audio, if you wanted to spend the cart space. The cart space argument is worth breaking out. Nintendo were insistent none of these demos were possible on a CD-based console, and given that CD drives topped out at 300 kilobytes a second at the time, they may have been right. The PlayStation, though, got closer to a lot of these than the N64 ever did by the end of its life. Nintendo's argument was to claim that cartridges were 2 million times faster than CDs. They mean access time, which is fair because CDs are slow spinning things. An old drive like that can take a full fifth of a second to find a specific piece of data from a standing start. It's a little misleading, of course, because after that it can stream it out at a fairly decent consistent rate if it's been stored smartly. Reading between the lines, you can find the real reason.
The new cartridge format will allow us to bring consumers the best in technology at a mass market price. It makes the machine cheap, and then you're trapped buying games for twice the price of PlayStation.
CD drives were still expensive, cartridge slots less so. By leaving it out, Nintendo keep the price of the machine down at the cost of the games themselves being more expensive. It ended up being another reason the N64 got held back a little. As Sony made a huge thing of their Platinum range, Nintendo's costs never quite allowed them to match it, especially for third-party games. The specs promise breaks down a little at this point. The N64 does not run above existing television standards at all. UK PAL spec is 720 by 576 pixels. Most N64 games run at 320 by 200, with a high resolution mode managing 640 by 480, which pretty much matches, but does not exceed America's NTSC format. The wrinkle comes with this line: real-time anti-aliased 3D texture mapping for ultra-realistic images. Anti-aliasing is a technique for blending diagonal lines to eliminate the shimmering you get when viewing lowish resolution stuff in 3D. The N64, as far as I could tell, could not do it in hardware, and even if it could, it had a vanishingly tiny maximum texture size, which accounts for the blurriness of so many N64 games. So this article represents an interesting glimpse of the future, but even accounting for the fact the machine they talk about was 3 years away for us Brits, the actual realisation of the future the article paints was further off still. There are facts that are not up for debate. For instance, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was the third and last Indiana Jones movie ever released. That movie, which I remind you is the last one featuring Indiana Jones, starred Harrison Ford and former professional spousal abuser and now amateur corpse Sean Connery. It was released in 1989. If you're somehow still with us after that lesson in spinning disk data access times, you'll remember this magazine is from 1994, which seems late considering the movie, which was the last Indiana Jones one they ever thought to release, was 5 years old. And you'd be right. It's not even that the game was late as such. The home computer versions had been released by US Gold and Lucasfilm pretty much with the film. There was a Master System port a year later, one of the 4 games used to launch US Gold on the machine. And we know this, because right back in Season 3 we looked at all 4 of them. And I wasn't a fan. Unresponsive doesn't help you fight enemies either, especially as you get killed by them walking through you. For some reason, a full 4 years later, Ubisoft decided to commission NMS Software, no relation, to port it to the NES and Game Boy. It feels like a losing battle, and the 36% rating from NMS, no relation, suggests this one is not going to go well. Now, I think it's fair to just remind ourselves the NES and Master System were direct competitors. I think we should also remind ourselves the NES game came along 4 years later than the one on history's greatest console. And I wouldn't like you to think I'm some sort of Master System fanboy. There are nearly 10 UK releases I don't own for that system, for instance. So what I'm going to do is leave the Master System version up and let you make a judgment on the relative graphical strengths of their ports of what are, I remind you, the same game. What in the hell, NMS? Either of them. A single colour main character is not acceptable on the NES in 1994. It's barely acceptable on the Spectrum in 1994. There's an exciting new mechanic too. The lights keep going out unless you collect the torches, an effect that removes the last remaining colour in the game and actually makes it look a lot more like a Spectrum game, which is a little unfortunate actually. On the plus side, they've taken the chance to fix the most hilariously bizarre eccentricity of the Master System, where somehow your whip had ammo. They fixed this by removing the whip entirely. I say again for those at the back, this is an Indiana Jones game without a pissing whip. The single, most identifiable trait of the character is gone. It'd be like having a Sonic game where he can't run, or a flat-chested Lara Croft. It's just wrong. Indy's own father wouldn't recognise him, which, as I remember the plot of Last Crusade, is likely to make things a little bit awkward. This leaves you at the mercy of his terrible, terrible melee style, which is almost impossible to judge and frequently seems like it's entirely random if you collect or not. It's the kind of thing I could put at the feet of my idiocy with this type of game, but NMS specifically call it out in their review as well. Thankfully, the game does throw continues and lives at you in a manner that makes it almost suspicious they knew this. Some of the collision detection is very clearly off too. It's very easy to miss the chains you need to grab onto or even fail to jump up onto them. And if you fall off the many traversal challenges, you'll fall to your death. Or worse, into the water, where Indy is apparently allergic to it and just bounces around until you run out of health because there's no invulnerability time at all either. There's also that bane of any exploration game, a tight time limit. a limit that appears to have no plot justification at all. There's no reason we have to escape this cave quickly. We're not even trying to escape the cave, we're looking for a particular item. This was brought home to me when I ran out of time on what appeared to be a lengthy derail that netted me a health refill, just before the game killed me entirely for running out of time. I'm pretty certain that health pickup is essentially impossible to obtain and finish the level, which begs the question, what is the point of that part of the level design? The answer is pretty obvious. They recycled the level designs from the home computer versions, which of course do not have a time limit. So why did they add one here? To be fair, the Master System version also has this failing, but it's not like I held that up as a paragon of non-shit gaming, isn't it? So you wonder why they converted it at all, especially if this is the only justice they could do to it. But in reality, it's even more weird, because it's not like the NES actually needed an Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade game 5 years after they finished making Indiana Jones movies forever. Because it already had one. 3 years earlier, 2 years after they made the last and final Indiana Jones movie, Taito published one from Software Creations exclusively for it. So maybe this is a better option for your NES-based needs for the third of 3 Indiana Jones movies. The intro is certainly nicer, in that it has one, and a track mode takes you through the entire movie game in spoiler form, showing you levels that at least have some minor level of variety about them. There's several distinct punching sections, a tank level, a motorbike level. It's a little more promising than the computer version, but bad. So let's start again, taking advantage of the rather nice feature that lets you attempt elements of the plot in any order. So we can go to Venice and... what? It's a sodding sliding block puzzle, isn't it? I hate these. I can't do them. And as I understand it, if you can do them, there's no challenge to them. You pretty much just follow a pattern. I fail miserably. Fine, let's go to Bust Dad Out, which involves a fight through the world's worst designed prison. Perhaps they got MC Escher to design it in order to eliminate prison overcrowding. The problem is, they seem to have forgotten to put any cells in, just more staircases, which don't appear to lead to any location that actually makes sense. The fighting is as confusing as in the other game too, with punches and kicks seemingly connecting at random, with no real blocking or tactics actually available. And note, these are your options, because like the NES version of the Lucasfilm Games title, Indiana inexplicably doesn't have a whip. You know, that really useful ranged weapon he canonically carries everywhere he goes. Most of these same issues happen on the boat level, although at least it's less of a maze. People run at you even quicker than they did in the prison though, and there's more of them. It seems like they respawn too, so you have to keep moving. It's my favourite level though, because it's the one I completed. The fight on the tank is awkward for similar reasons. As soon as you get floored, you fall off the tank and... hold up, he's got an effing whip to drag himself up with. That would have been really fricking useful about 1400 times so far in this game. Even apart from fighting, if he can just apparently whip a flat surface and use it to support his weight. I feel a bit like the kind of absolute melt who complains about the physics in Tomb Raider games. But it'd be nice if it was even a little bit consistent about its own rules. It's more like if after 15 levels of being Lara, she suddenly found herself unable to scale a chest-high wall. Which is of course also your mum's wrestling persona. The motorcycle section you can potentially get through the game without ever seeing. It's you trying to recover your father's diary, which is stolen from you if you fail elsewhere. It's a nice change of pace and an interesting one at that, once you work it out. Your bike can jump, which will let go, maybe he's using his whip to pull the bike through the air or something. The frustrating bit is the mines, where you have to go as slow as actual balls, and even so the controls are so sensitive and the mines so close together that you'll be lucky to survive. I'll certainly take the change of scenery though. So yeah, the Taito game still isn't good. It's probably not even as good as the good versions of the other one, which isn't surprising since that's the one that was at least originated by Lucasfilm Games. But it's better than Ubisoft, who, a full half-decade after they stopped making Indiana Jones movies forever after The Last Crusade, somehow managed to produce the worst version of an already iffy game. It's almost a shame they didn't make any more Indiana Jones movies. But after all, it's not called the penultimate crusade. But it could have meant we got more games. Although that didn't stop LucasArts from following up their point-and-click adventure with the movie sequel we never got, in the form of the really excellent Fate of Atlantis. Maybe if they'd ever decided to make a fourth Indiana Jones movie, they could have made it based on that. Otherwise, in this theoretical universe where they had decided to make a fourth Indiana Jones movie, it could have been really, really bad. On the back page, Chinny Vision, the YouTube channel that always uses original hardware. We're not actually here to talk about Chinny's remarkable long-term efforts to preserve how these games really looked and played in their original habitat though. Because of course we were talking official magazines. And Chinny, being the Amstrad CPC's answer to my love of the Sega Master System, has done a proper in-depth look at the early days of Amstrad Computer User. If that section piqued your interest at all, you might want to go check that stuff out. And just like that, like PlayStation Official Magazine, we're gone. But like Play, we'll be back next month, unless Future wield the axe even quicker than I expect. To Play, that is. They can't touch us. In the meantime, may this shot of the NMS subscription page prompt you to do the same for us, and tune in next month to find out if I'm balancing this Nintendo episode with the Sega one, or if the constant mentions of the CPC have given me a cunning plan. It's us, Yesterzine.